Did you know one of the greatest actors of our generation suffered from PTSD, ADD, and alcoholism? His name was Lee Marvin. This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV. And this week, my special guest is author Dwayne Epstein. We're going to talk about the life of Lee Marvin right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, the interview portion of our show, and today we're going to talk about Lee Marvin, the incredible, iconic actor from the 60s, 70s, 80s. I don't know if he was around too much in the 90s, and just an amazing talent and an amazing individual. And we're going to talk about him, and he's not just a guy's guy. He's a real man's man in the old school sense and in a new school sense too, because he's very interesting. We're going to get into it. We're going to get into all of that. My special guest, is a return guest to Guys Radio, Dwayne Epstein. He's a terrific author. We had him on talking about the Killing Generals book a little while ago about the making of the Dirty Dozen. And as I did my research on Dwayne, I realized that he wrote this incredible book, award-winning book called Point Blank about Lee Marvin. So I want to have him back on the show. I read the book, and it was well worth my time. So first of all, welcome back to Guys Radio, Dwayne Epstein.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Well, I got to tell you, as I was just mentioning before we went on air, you did an amazing job with this book. This is chock full of information. I mean, Lee Marvin died. How long ago did he die, Dwayne?
He died in 87.
Okay, 87. So it's been a while, yet you have managed to, without ever meeting him, really get to the essence of who this guy was. And he was pretty darn incredible. He seems like he got along. All the other actors respected him. He liked all the other actors, with the exception of, I think, Ronald Reagan. He was in such a variety, even though when he started out, he was in all of these tough guy, bad guy roles, and he'd get killed in the movies. Over time, he rose to the top and became one of the biggest, if not the biggest star in the world for a period of time when Dirty Dozen came out, right after he won the Academy Award for Cat Ballou, and he beat out a whole bunch of really top acting talents. So let's start at the beginning, because obviously I'm very passionate and excited about this because it was such a great book, and I learned so much, and I have so many Lee Marvin movies that I want to go back and see, and I have so many Lee Marvin movies that I want to see. So let's start with your inspiration. Why Lee Marvin, Dwayne?
It's a very good question. It actually, it started without having anything to do with Lee Marvin. I have what I call my holy trinity of favorite actors, and they include Steve McQueen, James Cagney, and Burt Lancaster. I'm a big retro pop culture fan. Now, there was a gentleman who had written a book about Steve McQueen named Marshall Terrell, and I liked it. And at the time, I had read almost anything ever written about Steve McQueen, and he seemed to get it right, unlike a lot of other authors. Now, also, there were a couple of mistakes in his book, and I wanted to talk to him about it, and consequently, I was able to. And we met for dinner, and we were talking, and as we were talking, we were naturally talking about movies. And in the conversation, Marshall said to me, "You should have written your own book. You know movie history." And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to write my own book. The only problem is you wrote it. I'd love to write a book on Steve McQueen." So that became the catalyst for an interesting conversation. He said, "You can still write a book about, an actor from the past. Who do you like and who hasn't been written about? Because there's a marketing factor involved in this." And we were going through different people, and I realized nobody had written a book on Lee Marvin, and I always liked him. He's not part of what I call my holy trinity, but he was always a favorite nonetheless. And so I started doing some initial research based on that conversation. And the more I discovered about him, the more fascinated I became. And there were certain aspects of his life and career that just was so incredible to me, in that even though he was a product of his generation, he was born in the 20s, which meant he lived through the Depression, World War II, and the Cold War and all that kind of stuff. And that was an aspect to his life, no doubt about it, because he lived through it. But he still, I discovered, was not typical of that generation. He was very liberal. He was for gay rights. He loved rock and roll and classic R&B. I mean, this isn't the kind of thing you'd say about his contemporaries like John Wayne or the like. And that interested me. And also too, as all interesting people are, especially if they're creative entities, I discovered a fascinating through line in the films he made. And I put it to other film historians that I knew and were close to, a gentleman named Bill Crone, who had written several great books, mostly on Hitchcock. And I asked him, doing the research, I said, do you know if there's anybody else who ever portrayed violence on film and villainy as realistically as Lee Marvin? And he said, let me get back to you. And a couple of days later, he said, no, only Lee Marvin, which was interesting. So consequently, that set me on the path of a theme, as well as trying to find out where did that come from. And that was equally fascinating because there are specific reasons for that. It's not obviously would be his time in World War II. He was a Marine in the Pacific and he was wounded. That's a fact because he did have post-traumatic stress disorder. But also, too, a big factor was his childhood, which I discovered by interviewing his older brother. He had an older brother, Robert Marvin. He passed away in '99, but luckily I got to meet up with him. And it was not an easy thing to do because he was very much, and what's the word I'm looking for? He was idiosyncratic. He agreed to be interviewed over the phone. I found him by my cousin who worked for the New York City School Board, and I knew Robert Marvin had been a teacher. So I asked her, can you find him for me? And she said, well, if he was ever a teacher in New York, I can find him. And she goes, she got back to me and said, there's a gentleman named Robert Marvin who lives in Bearsville, New York. Here's his phone number. Give it a try. I called the number, and what I loved was I wasn't on the phone with him 2 seconds, and I knew it was Lee Marvin's brother because of the way he answered the phone. I heard Lee Marvin's voice in a heartbeat. I was like, hello, is this Robert Marvin, brother of Lee Marvin? And he went, yeah, who are you? And I was like, oh, that's him. That's definitely him. And it took several phone calls, and I did go to Woodstock to meet with him. And it was interesting because when I got there, even though he agreed to the interview, when I got there, he kind of changed his mind. And he was like, what's in it for me? So that was kind of scary because I flew all the way out from California on a waiter's salary, which is what I was doing at the time. But eventually I talked him into it. And the end result was one of the single best sources for information about Lee Marvin's life and work. And he also eventually opened up his family archives to me. I was able to get the letters Lee Marvin wrote to his family during the war, which was a major exclusive. I got letters his parents wrote to each other while they were courting, all kinds of great stuff. And most of the photos that you saw in the book, okay, they were from Robert.
Okay. All right, well, let's start at the beginning because there's so much to cover, and I think you just painted a nice picture of kind of what some of the big themes of Marvin's life. But let's start at the beginning then. So tell us a little bit about his childhood. From what I took out of the book is that he got thrown out of like 16 schools. I mean, he just kept getting placed in different schools, and he had an issue with authority, and it was very combative personality, and he just kind of wanted to be left alone and do his thing. He liked to fish, he liked sports, and he really didn't have a sense of who he was, I don't think, as a kid. And so he fought all the time, and he got kicked out of all these different schools. Tell us more. What about his childhood? What about his relationship with his dad and also with his big brother?
Well, I'll tell you, everything that you just mentioned is, of course, in the book. And I'd like to make mention of one thing that wasn't in the book that I found out after the fact. I got this story from an actor named Bruce Davison, the guy who played Willard in that movie. I became friends with him on Facebook. After the book came out, he told me this story that I found amazing, in that he said he had met Lee Marvin when they were both making different movies in Munich, and they started chatting. And Bruce Davison happened to tell Lee Marvin that my father was a drunk, but he was a happy drunk. And Lee Marvin said, not my father. And Bruce Davison said, what do you mean? And he proceeded to tell Bruce the story that I think says volumes. And if I'd have known it, I'd have put it in the book. After getting kicked out of so many schools when he was a young boy, I mean, I think adolescent, 13, 14 years old, he got in a physical fight with his father. And his father pushed him down the stairs and almost knocked out his front teeth. And he was bleeding and he was holding his hand over his mouth. And Lee Marvin yelled up at his father, "What is it going to take to get you to love me?" And his father looked down at him and he said, "Fucking die."
Oh,
Now,
jeez.
now, that's the kind of thing that's going to definitely affect your life. And that's just one example. There were several examples I did put in the book that despite the way his father treated him, and he's often very cold and distant, Lee Marvin otherwise idolized his father. He thought he was, some friend had written about Lee, having known him as a child, saying Lee thought his father hung the moon out every night, which I think is an interesting quote. While at the same time, he had a lot of pent up dislike for his mother.
Yeah, that's
Also,
what was that? What was that all about? He definitely didn't like his mother.
well, the thing is, his mother came from the old South. She was a Virginian and probably best described in popular terms as a steel magnolia. And she put a lot of emphasis on proper social mores. And Lee hated that. He found it to be hypocritical. And he always fought against that kind of thing throughout his life. But he saw it in his mother. He would never necessarily get into arguments with her, but he would like say things behind her back and hated that he had to always say or do the right thing in her presence. That kind of thing.
How, tell us about how he kind of, after all of this turmoil, he found himself in some type of summer stocky type repertory companies up in the Catskills, I believe, and kind of fell into acting initially there, and then came back to it after he came back from the war.
Oh, well, actually, he didn't really do any acting before the war. When he was in high school, he was in a couple of plays, but that's
Right,
about
that's
it.
what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, after the war, his parents had settled in Woodstock, where the famous concert took place. And long before that, it had always been a kind of a haven for bohemians and artists.
Right.
And when he came, well, first he was in Chicago for a couple of years, and then his parents had gone to Woodstock, which when he was growing up, they used to have a summer home there. So they were comfortable there. Now, when he got to Woodstock, his father used his influence. He got him a job as a plumber's assistant, which is a great story aside, because as a plumber's assistant, I met the son of the guy who ran the plumber shop that Lee worked at, and he told me some hysterical stories about Lee. Now, that aside, while he was there, Woodstock, being the home of many bohemians, had even though it was kind of like a cottage, small village kind of thing, there were three legitimate theaters in that town: the Maverick Theater, the Woodstock Theater, and the third one escapes me. Anyway, while he was working this is the story Lee liked to tell, that while he was working as a plumber's assistant, he was called to go unplug the toilet. And while he was there, he saw this beautiful red-haired blondish actress and decided, hey, I got to get into this, right? Well, that's not really what happened. What happened was he was at a party one night at a friend's house, and the leading man of the play they were doing at the time, the play was called Roadside by Lynn Riggs, and everybody was getting drunk and having a good time. And one of the guys who ran the theater was a gentleman named E.J. Ballantyne. And Ballantyne was at his wit's end because one of the leading actors had taken sick. And because of the character he was supposed to play, E.J. Ballantyne shouted from across the room, "Hey, Lee, we need a Texas loudmouth. You think you can do that?" And Lee was like, "Well, sure, EJ," or Teddy, they used to call him. "Sure, Teddy." Well, the next morning, hungover, Lee had to learn the line and perform it that night. And Ballantyne's daughter-in-law, Betty Ballantyne, whom I interviewed, told me she stayed up with Lee all day and night until the show. And she said, there's no way he could have learned it. It was just way too much, but he gave it a shot. And what happened was, as far as Lee was concerned, once he hit the stage, that was it. It was magic for him. He had found what he wanted to do with life. Also, those who had witnessed it had told me that his entrance was amazing because back east, there's sometimes, dry thunderstorms, right? And the minute he hit the stage, there was a thunder crack and a lightning strike. Now, you couldn't have planned that better if you tried, you know? So that was it. He was sold from that moment on.
So what happened from that point? By the way, my special guest and return guest, Dwayne Epstein, the author of the amazing book, Point Blank, all about Lee Marvin, our subject today. So what happened after this initial foray into the theater? How did he get some traction? I know the war came up. He went to war. He came back. How did that work out?
Okay, after the war is when he and was working as a plumber is when he decided to become an actor.
Okay.
Right. And what he did was he enrolled in the American Theater Wing, which was an interesting thing as a result of the GI Bill that had been passed, which was to train soldiers to become actors. And it wasn't even so much a matter of, you know, how to become the character, how to get inside the soul of what you're playing. It was really a kind of a training school. It was about how to get work as an actor. And they had some fascinating teachers, and Lee enrolled. Now, when he went to enroll, his father thought he was going to enroll to become a carpet layer, but that's not what he did. He enrolled to become an actor. And the GI Bill paid for his tuition, and he studied. And unlike a lot of actors, it seems, in the years since, what they used to call trod the boards. Anything he can do to get an acting gig, he did. He did summer stock. He made Army training films. He did radio shows, live television in New York. And he got a lot of work, and he got a lot of experience under his belt. He hated doing summer stock in a repertory theater in different parts of the country. You know, he said in an interview one time, "You're in the midst of doing some great emotional scene, and some whistle blows, and all these guys who were going fishing walked out of the stage with their cleats and shoes and what have you, and you know, and all they care about is getting." You know, that was his take on it. And eventually, he did make it to Broadway in the play Billy Budd. He played a minor part, but and from there he got a part auditioning as an extra in a Gary Cooper service comedy, and they sent him. He did some scenes in Norfolk, Virginia, and then he went to L.A. And when he was in L.A., he met an agent, a guy named Meyer Mishkin. And what's interesting is when he met this gentleman, the moment they met until the day Lee Marvin died, he was his agent, which is really rare, very rare.
Now, so tell us a little bit about his travels back and forth and how the acting world was different then. He got obviously at the beginning, he wanted to get onto Broadway, and he got in Billy Budd, and I think he played a soldier, and he pretty much had a couple of lines. It's like, wow, you know, that's all there is. So he went back and forth, California, came back to New York, and his agent kind of helped him make the right decisions.
Big time.
Talk to us about that.
Well, this is interesting in that when he was at the Maverick Theater, and he did like a few seasons there, one of the other actors that were at the Maverick Theater was an actress named James Doohan, whom you might remember better as Scotty on Star Trek.
Right.
And I interviewed Doohan, and he told me he had met after they were done at the Maverick, and he was and Marvin was looking for more professional work. He met Doohan in a bar, and this was when he was doing Billy Budd, and he had just done some scenes for the Cooper comedy. It was called "You're in the Navy Now," and he asked James Doohan. He said, "You know, my agent, this is a gentleman who wants to be my agent, who told me I can get better work in Hollywood than I could ever get waiting to get work on Broadway." And James Doohan said, "Take your agent's advice. You've gotten as far as you can go on Broadway, Lee. Go to Hollywood. You'll get better work there. This guy is right." And so that helped Lee decide. So he came back to Hollywood, and sure as hell, Meyer Mishkin got him work on a regular basis. Not a lot of big parts right away. That took a while. But Meyer Mishkin, whom I interviewed, was a very, very interesting man. Friends and associates called him Little Mish, because I think he stood about 5'2" to Lee Marvin's 6'3". But he was very dynamic, and he was very, you know, forceful in terms of how to get things done, and he got Lee work.
Amazing. It seems like one of his breakthrough roles, he played a lot of kind of bad guys and was willing to take on any role. As long as it was different, he had something new he could work on. He got killed a lot. And because of his looks, he wasn't cast as the leading man so much as kind of the antagonist. But he got into The Wild One with Brando, and he did a great job. Some thought he was a little too old for that role, but he worked out terrifically. And Brando and he got along.
Yeah, they did. Unlike much that had been written about the filming of the movie at the time, but they did get along. In fact, Marlon Brando babysat for Lee Marvin's son when he was like a year or two. I interviewed Christopher Marvin, who told me, I don't really remember that at all because I was too young, but he did say, I just like the idea that Brando changed my diapers.
Yeah.
But the thing about The Wild One, and as well as his other roles at that time period, I discovered a letter he had written his brother at the time, where he tells Robert, at the time he hadn't gotten the part yet, he was up for it, and he told Robert, I'm going to be playing, I think I really got a good shot at playing this character, and I think I can do it like nobody else can because I understand these men, these guys, these punks, and I hope I really do get the part. And the thing is, when it came to playing characters like that, when he was at the American Theater Wing and also when he was at Maverick, he had said about the characters he was asked to play, at least when he started out as an actor, he said, I understand these men. I understand these brutal, violent men. I know how they are and I know why they are. And he did that a lot in his career. But he actually came to a point where he said, I'm sick and tired. There's only so many ways you can say, take it in the gut, Harry. And he got tired of that after a while. And he was able to find a niche in the way he played his characters. And the thing you mentioned a moment ago about many film critics thought he was too old for the part, okay? That's because, with all due respect, most of the film critics in that time period had no idea what they were talking about. The movie was based on an actual incident that happened in Hollister in the late 40s after World War II. And most of the bikers who attacked that small town were actually even older than what Marvin was at the time. There was a famous photo in Life magazine at the time of this looking rather middle-aged, overweight biker hanging on his motorcycle with a beer in his hand. And Marvin knew that. Marvin understood those guys. And by the way, I'm going to jump ahead briefly and we can go back to it, but it was his performance in The Wild One that got him the role in Cat Ballou that he won the Oscar for.
Let's talk about some of the other roles he worked with. Some really big stars. Caine Mutiny, he was in that, right?
Yep.
What was his with Bogart? And I think Bogart was somebody he really looked up to.
Oh, big time.
What was his role there?
He played a character named Horrible, and he did comedy scenes like with Claude Akins. He was Meatball, and Claude Akins was Horrible. Anyway, the guy, he was a standout in the sense that if you give him something small to do in a small role, Lee Marvin always knew how to make the most of it, like any really inventive actor can do. And when I interviewed the gentleman who was the son of the owner of the plumbing company he had worked for in Woodstock, a guy named Bill Heckeroth, Heckeroth told me that his favorite Lee Marvin performance was in Caine Mutiny. He said, because there's a line Marvin has when he's walking through the deck and he's carrying some pipe and he shouts out, lady with a baby coming through. Bill Heckeroth said, ever since I heard that, I've been using it ever since. The story goes, more Hollywood ballyhoo, was that Lee Marvin served as a technical advisor for the Caine Mutiny because of his military experience. That's just not true. It wasn't true at all. Mainly because the movie is about the Navy. Bogart was a Navy veteran. If they needed advice from anybody, they could have gone from the lead actor. But in any event.
Now, he was also in a lot of Westerns, Lee Marvin. Bad Day at Black Rock was a big one, right?
Yep, big time. When you're talking about the people he worked with before he was a known entity.
Please, yeah.
He worked with Montgomery Clift, Spencer Tracy, John Wayne, the aforementioned Marlon Brando, all the biggest stars of Gary Cooper, when he started his career. Another quick story about The Wild One that I loved was that when the film came out, like I mentioned a moment ago about how film critics really didn't understand or know what the film was about, the people the film was about, the bikers, especially the older ones, they were so enamored with Lee Marvin's performance They hung out outside the theater where the movie premiered, and they followed him home. And at first, he was understandably not happy about that. And his wife Betty told me that they followed him home and they hung out on the front lawn for a couple of days. And Lee kept telling Betty, "Don't make eye contact with them. They're way too scary." And what wound up happening was while they were hanging out on the front lawn for a couple of days, she made them all, made them dinner, made them breakfast. They loved Lee Marvin that much. Matter of fact, the shirt that Lee Marvin wore in that movie, those solid black and white stripes,
Right.
the guy who started the Hells Angels, a gentleman named Sonny Barger, bought that shirt in auction. That's how much he loved Lee Marvin. I mean,
Unbelievable.
yeah, and he stole movies from the likes of. He didn't steal a movie from Spencer Tracy. Tracy was too good, but the scenes that Lee Marvin had, the guy who wrote the screenplay for Bad Day at Black Rock, a guy named Millard Kaufman, he said Marvin was brilliant in doing little things that you're not supposed to notice, but you do anyway. Watch the way he twirled the gun when he was just messing around. Or best yet, throughout the movie, he keeps trying to tuck the back of his shirt in, his shirt tail, and he never does. He makes the effort and it keeps falling out. He did it a certain way that was hysterical. And, stole movies from anything he did with John Wayne. He made 3 movies with it. He was always the center of attention when he was on screen. And they got along well, even though they were very different men. They got along. And he was enamored and impressed, even though he didn't like method actors. He thought they were phony. The 2 best actors he worked with, 2 of the best actors he worked with, were proponents of the method system, Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift. And once again, he stole the movie. It wasn't a very good movie. A ripoff of John with Raintree County, and he was terrific in it.
How would you, Dwayne, how would you describe Lee Marvin's? Apparently, he was a real student of acting, and he would watch a lot of film, and he could pick apart other people's performance, even though he wasn't trained in the same way as some thespians, if you will, and he wasn't method. How would you describe his instinctual, intuitive type of acting?
You just described it in that word. See, he was a trained actor. However, it wasn't the kind of training that the likes of Brando or Clift had had. And Betty Marvin told me, his first wife told me, that they'd watch a movie and in like 10 minutes time, whoever the lead was, Marvin would lean over to Betty and go, "Watch, in 2 seconds, he's going to do this." And the actor would do exactly what Marvin said. And, or sometimes she said he would go, "You know what? This guy knows his lines. He knows what he's doing, but he acts like he's got a broomstick stuck up his ass."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he knew what was good acting, what was bad acting. And he loved to point out when it was phony. And that doesn't necessarily mean he's disrespecting acting in and of itself. It's just that when it came time to do it, he just did it. He didn't, I have to, like Hamlet and figure this out or that out. Just by knowing the character, he would understand what the character was. And oftentimes, when not considering a role, but when he was preparing for a role, he would just go off with the script, usually down by the beach or someplace, read the script and just think. And he would write notes in the script. I've seen some of the scripts he had, and I saw some of the notes he would write, and that would be it. And once the director said action, he was on the money every time. He once said famously, how is it that somebody asked him, how do you get the parts that a lot of other actors would like to get because of the way you play them? And Lee Marvin said, it's not that other actors would want to play it the way I play it. It's just that once I get the part, I play it better than anybody else. And when they don't know what to do with a role, they'll say, let's give him to Marvin. He'll work something out with this. And that's exactly how he got the roles he did.
And that's a great trait to have. The Liberty Valance, The Killers, Cat Ballou, Donovan's Reef, Attack, 7 Men from Now. Tell us about some of these incredible films that we forget sometimes that Lee Marvin was a big part of.
That's one of the myriad of reasons I wrote the book, was I wanted to turn people on to the films he had made that may have been forgotten. And I discovered some films before I got seriously into the research. I was pretty familiar with his career before that, but I had never seen 7 Men from Now. And when I saw it, I was blown away. He's amazing. And in doing so, in the time in which I was working on the book, I was lucky enough to interview a lot of the participants of his films that were still alive. I interviewed the writer director of Seven Men from Now, Bud Bediger, who is now a bit of a cult director. He told me marvelous stories about what Marvin would do. Also, the director of Cat Ballou, Elliot Silverstein. I interviewed him. I wasn't able to interview Don Siegel, who directed The Killers, but I did interview several of the cast members, and they told me great stories. Specifically, Clu Gulager, who was the partner to Lee Marvin in The Killers, and he told me that Lee set up this game with Gulager. If you've ever seen The Killers, you'll see that, real quick, basic premise. Clu Gulager and Lee Marvin are two hired assassins hired to kill John Cassavetes. They do it, and then Lee Marvin's character gets curious. Why does this guy not fight or try to run or anything? And then that's what the movie is about. There's a lot of flashback with Marvin and Gulager trying to find out why John Cassavetes didn't want to be killed. Now, in the scenes they have together, when they lean on some of the people they talk to, Gulager is constantly doing little actor's tricks. He's playing with a toy car. He's taking swigs from a flask. He's doing all this, and Clu Gulager told Marvin in advance he was going to be doing that, and Marvin told him, "Do what you want to do, kid. They're going to be watching me." And that's exactly what happens when you watch the movie. It's the way Marvin plays the part, and because of that, during the making of the movie, Gulager told me that early on, Lee Marvin said to Gulager, all these other actors can't act their way out of a paper bag. I'm going to get them, and they're not even going to know it. And he used several examples. He got, what's his face? Claude Akins. He got Norman Fell. But his favorite target was Ronald Reagan. And during the making of the movie, every time he would get somebody, he would stand behind the actor and hold up a finger and go, "That's one." And he would do it with the next actor. "That's two." And his favorite was Reagan. What he did with Reagan was this big scene that they had towards the end of the movie. Marvin, every single time they rehearsed it, from the rehearsal to the dress rehearsal to the blocking to the actual shooting of the scene, more than one take, he did it different every single time, but still believably. And Reagan didn't change a single thing every single time he did it. And so at the end of it, and Don Siegel said, "Cut, that's a take," Marvin went, "That's five." And there was only, Reagan left. And he goes, that was the kind of stuff that he would do.
Now, was this to kind of pump himself up for his best performance, or
Absolutely.
he wasn't doing it to necessarily make the other actors look bad, but it seemed like he had to do this type of stuff to get his best performance out of himself.
Also, yes, absolutely. But also, it was an attempt to get the actors to do better jobs. And more importantly, it was a way to make the scene better. That's what counted to him. Make the scene as best as possible. I could give you countless examples of that, but we had limited time. Real quick, another fast example, because we had mentioned it a moment ago, and why I love Seven Men from Now so much. He came to the set the very first day with a red woman's garter on his sleeve, and Bud Bediger said, "What the hell is that?" And Marvin goes, "I don't know. I saw it in wardrobe, and I thought it would say something about the character." and Bediger went, "I love that he did that. It's never explained. He just wears it, and it keeps the audience guessing." So, that kind of thing.
Well, let's talk about, we want to get some career highlights. So he won the Oscar for Cat Ballou. He played, I believe, 2 roles in that.
Yes, you did.
And it's kind of a comedy Western type of thing.
That's exactly right.
And he beat some really big names for the Oscar. Rod Steiger. Who was he up against? Richard Burton.
Laurence Olivier.
Wow.
Right. Oscar Werner, who was nominated for the film, for co-starring in the film with Lee Marvin, Ship of Fools. So yeah, it was a pretty tough year. And Marvin didn't think he stood a chance.
Well, how did he get that role, and why did he want that role? Just to expand his palette?
Well, to go back to what we were talking about a moment ago, there were several actors who were considered. First and foremost was Burt Lancaster, mainly because his producing partner, Harold Heck, was producing the film. And he wanted Burt Lancaster to play Kid Shalene, and he wanted Tony Curtis to play the part that Michael Callan eventually played. It fell through. And at the time, they were approaching Jose Ferrer and Kirk Douglas, and Jack Palance had let it be known he really wanted to play the part. Unfortunately, Palance was never offered the role. But that aside, while the producers and executives and what have you were debating who could play the role, Elliot Silverstein, the director, was watching TV one night and he saw The Wild One. And when he saw the way Lee Marvin fell off his motorcycle in a couple of scenes in the movie, he goes, "That's Kid Shalane. If he could fall off his horse like that, he can do it." And more importantly, even though Kirk Douglas was being seriously considered, Elliot Silverstein told me I would have a real problem working with Kirk Douglas, who was a big star at the time, because there would be things I would be asking him to do. I don't think he'd be willing to do because he was such a big star. Mm-hmm. I don't think Marvin would have a problem with that at all. And that's exactly what happened. Marvin didn't want to do it at first, but his agent and his wife read the script and begged him to do it. And as he often said when introducing his wife to people, he would say, "This is my best friend and my toughest critic." Whatever Betty suggested, he usually went with. And once he read the script, he goes, "It's the first laugh out loud script I've read in a long time." So he did it. And what's interesting is he played two characters, like you mentioned a moment ago. He played Kid Shalane, the broken down drunken gunfighter, and he played Kid Shalane's brother, Tim Strawn, who had his nose bitten off in a fight, so he wears a metal nose. Now, consequently, Marvin decided to play it as if he was Liberty Valance when he played Tim Strawn. And he's also Kid Shalane in many of the movies he already had made in the past. So it was kind of a parody of his screen persona, which I think may be one of the biggest reasons he won the Oscar. Because everybody knew in the everybody in the industry knew Lee Marvin, knew the parts he had played, and now here he is making fun of himself. Hollywood establishment loved it.
Okay, so he went and picked up his Oscar while he was filming. While he was filming The Dirty Dozen, and so from there, The Dirty Dozen became this iconic, biggest grossing movie of the year, and he got to the next level actually. So tell us about some of his choices at that point. I know Point Blank, the name of the book. I just watched it last night actually, and
cool.
the second time, and it's just a art house kind of film noir. It's got a very, very clever plot, and he's magnificent in it, as is Carol O'Connor and Angie Dickinson and some of the other folks. Their names escape me, but they were all the actors were recognizable and did a great job. And it's very twisty type of plot, if you will. So why did you pick Point Blank as the name of the book, and what was the significance of that movie in his career?
Well, I'd like to add just one more thing. Between Capaloo and The Dirty Dozen, he made The Professionals in between, but The Professionals hadn't been released yet. And that is hands down one of my all-time favorite films. It's practically flawless in my opinion. Now, I named the book Lee Marvin Point Blank, as I state in the introduction, because Lee Marvin's acting style was like that. It was point blank, in your face. Nothing you had to wonder what his motivation was. Why did he do this or that? It was the way he played a character. And it was point blank, in your face, like being shot in the face. And it was John Borman, by the way, the director of Point Blank and later Hell in the Pacific, who described Marvin's acting style that way. And so be it. I thought it was the perfect title.
Now, he had, we don't have to drill deep into this, but he had a lot of personal problems that were the result of his drinking. With his marriage, he kind of messed that up. And then he had somebody else he was involved with who really drove him crazy over time, had a big lawsuit with. And the drinking was on and off, and eventually, and he smoked a lot too, smoked a lot of cigarettes, and eventually he died at age 63?
63.
Yeah, so which is pretty young for a big, strong guy like him. In today's market, are there any, and acting goes in waves where there's this type of actor, there's the anti-hero, and then there's the likable, more, like with James Bond, we have the different types of James Bond kind of being portrayed to match up what's going on in the culture at the time. Do you see any actors from your research, Dwayne, that remind you of like, this is like a Lee Marvin type of guy? I was thinking like, well, Mickey Rourke's kind of like a Lee Marvin, but he's in no way Lee Marvin, like Lee Marvin is way bigger than life.
Well, I'd like to mention one thing. You're right about his smoking and drinking was the cause of his early demise. However, the real cause of his early demise resulted in his drinking and smoking, which was his PTSD, his post-traumatic stress disorder. And there was no doubt about the fact that he had it. And anybody that was really intimate with him that I got to know told me he had all the symptoms of PTSD: screaming nightmares, and both aversion and being drawn to acts of violence. If somebody slammed the door real hard, he would jump 5 feet in the air, that kind of thing. And he drank a lot, way too much, and he was drawn to violent situations. I had heard stories about, even before he was famous as an actor, he would purposely go into a bar where there was like 4 or 5 people and start a fight. And the person who told me this was Betty Ballantyne, whom he knew very well in Woodstock. And she said, I asked him, Lee, what's with all the scars on your face? And he would say, oh, I fell down the stairs. And she asked him like 2 or 3 different occasions. And finally she went, look, Lee, I know you're no klutz. You're one of the most balanced men I've ever met. Why are you getting all these scars on your face? And he broke down and told her. He said, I look for a fight. He says, I won't go into a bar if there's 1 or 2 people, but if there's 4 or 5, then I know nobody's going to get really hurt. The reason is I was trained to kill. I can't just turn that off like a switch. And that explains a lot about the man. Also, it explains a lot of the troubles he had in his life. It spilled over into real life. You couldn't just put it on screen.
So who would you say in today's market, and is there a market for a Lee Marvin type of actor?
Well,
because he's a real throwback. I mean, the world is a different place. I mean,
that's very true. And I've been asked that question several times. And I always think of, there are several actors who have an aspect of Lee Marvin's persona in them, but I always think of that great line Errol Flynn had in the movie The Adventures of Don Juan. Ever seen it?
I may have.
Okay, it's a great movie. And at the end of the movie, when he says he's going to swear off, liaisons with women, and he sees a beautiful woman go by, and he's about to go chase her, and his partner Alan Hale Sr. says to him, I thought you weren't going to do this anymore. And Errol Flynn has one of my favorite lines ever. He says, there's a little Don Juan in every man. And since I am Don Juan, there must be more of him in me.
I
Isn't
love
that great?
That's awesome.
That's how I think of some of the actors who are slightly reminiscent of Lee Marvin. The late Powers Booth, Tommy Lee Jones, Josh Brolin. There's all a little something there, but not enough to be the real Lee Marvin.
Got it. Okay.
Oh, the guy that was on that TV show Bosch, Titus Welliver, he's a great proponent of that kind of persona.
Got it. Okay. Great interview, great discussion, great book. Lee Marvin, Point Blank, Dwayne Epstein. You just did a terrific job. Once again, here's the book for those who can see on our YouTube channel. You just did a great job. What's next for you?
Thank you very much. By the way, believe it or not, even though the book came out 10 years ago, it's still very much available in paperback. It's what my publisher calls an evergreen, that it ain't going to go away anytime soon. So based on what we've been talking about, it's on Amazon, and it's also available on the publisher's website, schaffnerpress.com. So by all means, please read it. Like I said, it's still selling and it's still in print. In terms of what's next, I can't really say because I'm in the process of researching a project that is going to be in the hands of a publisher soon, and we haven't heard, my agent and I haven't heard back, and I don't want to jinx it.
Okay. All right. Well, great job. Good to see you again, Dwayne. And get that book done and come on back to Guys Radio.
Sounds good. I love it. Thank you, Robert.
You got it.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by following and subscribing on all our platforms. Thank you.